What was that?
What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to the Deals on Wheels podcast, brought to you by Deals on Wheels. I am your host, Carter Farthing, and if you did not watch episode 0 of the podcast, I definitely recommend that you go back and do so now before watching this episode. It's basically just a little 10-minute brief synopsis of about what you can expect to see from the Deals on Wheels YouTube channel and podcast in the future. If you did not see that episode and don't have any interest in watching it, allow me to introduce myself again. I am Carter Farthing, and I am a drifter from the Pacific Northwest who has been running Deals on Wheels since I think the end of 2020, and we have decided to start making content, including vlogs and podcasts. So if you are interested in taking this journey with us, definitely make sure that you hit the subscribe button below and follow us on all social medias at DLZONWLZ, spelled just how you see it above me and in the podcast title and everything like that. So if you are interested in supporting Deals on Wheels, definitely make sure that you check out DealsOnWheels.com as well. It is at the very top of the description. Now that we've paid some bills, I definitely want to get into this episode. Episode 0 was very well received. You guys messaged me on basically all forms of social media, letting me know how much you liked it. And I plan on continuing to make content that you guys enjoy for the foreseeable future. So this is probably going to be the first episode where we stretch along for probably about an hour and build a relationship between you and I, going over how I became infatuated with drift cars and joined the drift car community. I also do want to thank my girlfriend of 6 years now. We just celebrated our anniversary, and she gifted me with this beautiful MacBook Pro that is going to help us tremendously push out content for you guys. It's definitely being utilized right now to record this podcast, and it will be used to edit and upload everything in the future. So thank you, Rachel. I love you, and I spend every day thinking about you. So now that we're done with the heartfelt stuff, I do have a basic script in front of me, basically outline everything that I want to talk about for this episode. So if you do see my eyes gander down here. Yeah, I think gander would be the word. If you see my eyes gander down towards the table, I'm basically just reading the script. The first thing I really want to talk about is the origin of Deals on Wheels and how it started and how I became who I am today because of the drift community. It all basically started when I was a kid, about 10, 11, 12 years old, and my dad started building a rat rod. It's a truck. I'll probably insert a picture above me here somewhere. It's a 1949 Studebaker pickup that has a 351 Cleveland out of, I think, El Camino. Gran Torino, out of Gran Torino, something like that. Basically a Ford from the 70s. It's a small block, 351. It's a very, very fast truck. He's been building it ever since, I think he was 13. He paid like $85 for it or something when he was in high school, and he's been building it ever since. He went through a period there when I was, I think, first born, where he took, I think, about a decade off from building it, and it was sitting in his dad's shop, and eventually he pulled it out of there and started rebuilding it again. So the first time I think I ever got hands on a car, I was 11 years old, and my dad asked me to help him bleed the brakes on the Studebaker after he did a rear disc brake conversion, I believe. And we started bleeding the brakes. He had me hold down the pedal and whatnot. Definitely wasn't the mechanic that I am today by any sort of the imagination. And I'm definitely not a mechanic by any stretch of the imagination today. I know how to turn a wrench. I know how to put aftermarket parts on cars, but I am by no means a mechanic. But yeah, my dad started building rat rods again when I was 12 or 13, and he brought them around. He has had a handful of rat rods and continues to build them even now in his retirement. But my grandfather, his dad, also has been around building cars and been in the car industry for a long time. He worked at Firestone, which is basically where Bridgestone sells a majority of their tires. They're basically like the storefront for Bridgestone. But yeah, my dad and my grandpa both worked for Firestone for a number of years. They both ran a good number of stores throughout Washington State. And my other grandpa, my mom's dad, he's always been into Mustangs and racing and cars for his entire life as well. He used to race Formula Fords back in the 50s, 60s, I think up until the early 70s when my mom and her sisters and brother were starting to be born. And I think the family got in the way of his racing career a little bit, but he's still in the racing industry now. He's putting me through my racing career and my racing program. He's the head sponsor of our racing team, and he helps us basically build the car, get the car to and from events, and helps us basically whenever we need it. Thank you, Grandpa Joe, for everything that you do for us. Nothing here would be possible without you. So shout out to Grandpa Joe. Both my grandfathers and my dad helped me get into cars from early age. Around middle school, I definitely got more into the Japanese side of cars because, growing up around them, they always inspired me to be into American muscle and Mustangs and fast cars from America and stuff like that. But as I got older and I started hanging out with the BMX crowd, which is definitely a fun scene if you can handle it. But I was, I think, 7th or 8th grade when I started hanging out at the skate park. And I started seeing the people that were a couple grades above me go from riding skateboards and riding BMX at the skate park to pulling up at the skate park in drift cars. And I don't even know if they were considered drift cars back then, but they were cheap rear wheel drive manual cars, basically anything that they could get their hands on. I remember there's a handful of Miatas and a couple 240s that I grew up. I didn't even know what they were at that point, but I was infatuated with them. I knew that I wanted to be around them, basically from the very start. My buddy Caleb Palmer, shout out to Caleb. When we had to be 13 or 14 at this point, but he had, I think it had to have been Forza, one of the original Forza Motorsports that we played on his Xbox 360. And there was a white S13 coupe that we would drift around, I think Willow Springs. I think it was Willow Springs. But yeah, I was 14 years old, and every time we went over to Caleb's house from the skate park, we saw the older kids in their 240s. So we would leave the skate park and go play video games, where we could drive the 240s as well, just because we were so jealous. We didn't even know the difference between motors. We didn't know suspension. We didn't know all of that. But once we started turning 15, 16 years old, we got to the point where we were looking for our first daily drivers to get us to and from high school or whatnot, get us to and from the skate park, get us to and from food. Growing up and driving your car, you're definitely going to stop at a drive-through window or whatnot, probably 3 or 4 times a day. But back to the beginning of Deals on Wheels, everything started because I was entrepreneurial at heart. I definitely always had something to sell, whether it be, everyone says that they start with candy in elementary school, but I was actually the kid that would go to the candy store and buy a big bag and sell it individually and try to double my money. I did that a couple times. Once I started getting into middle school, I think actually this was before I even moved to Puyallup. I lived in Sumner and grew up in Sumner, which is just a couple miles away from Puyallup. But when I was in, I think the end of elementary school and the beginning of middle school or junior high, whatever it was, the kendama started being super popular. I think I have one. If you don't know what a kendama is, it's one of these little Japanese skill toys. And when we were kids, before the whole BMX, I think this was before or right during the whole BMX craze, those skill toys got super popular. And when there was the point where everyone wanted to buy one, even if you didn't progress and become very good at it, if you were just trying to kick it at a football game or something, everyone had a kendama, and you didn't want to be the only one that didn't have one and fit in with the cool kids. So I started selling them when I was in seventh or eighth grade. I think I bought 50 of them from a manufacturer and supplier of them, and I bought them in bulk, and I started selling them at lunch or before school started or after school or on the bus, basically wherever I could. But eventually I got called into the principal's office and threatened with expulsion for selling things at school without a business license or without permission from the school or anything. And they ended up bringing my parents in and telling me that I couldn't sell anything at school. So I eventually stopped doing that. I think kendamas were actually the first thing that I started selling on Facebook Marketplace and OfferUp way back when. But after that whole craze died, the kendamas eventually turned into designer clothing that I would try to resell and try to make some money off of. If you guys are familiar with Bape or Supreme or Antisocial Club or Palace or anything like that, they're all famous or somewhat famous designer clothing brands meant for hype beasts, anyone that wanted exclusive clothing that was only available for a couple minutes online. So the whole thing about it, or the whole specialty or rarity about it, was there would only be a certain amount of products that these brands would throw onto their website at any given time. And before they would sell out, if you did get your hands on an item and actually checked out in time before everything went out in stock and you got the item, you could double or triple your money just by, being one of the only people that got it before it sold out. So there was a point there where I was selling Jordans and Nikes and Yeezys and NMDs, which are a kind of Adidas, when everything was popular in the resale market. The resale market has definitely taken a crash in the last couple of years, just because I think people are kind of realizing that it's just clothes. No offense to anyone if you are a hype beast and are interested in stuff like that. When I graduated and became an adult, I realized that there's really not that much that's cool about wearing $1,000 shoes or $500 jackets or stuff like that. It was basically just cool to make money off of it. While I was doing that, I took all the money from reselling kendamas and reinvested into reselling shoes. And once the whole shoe thing kind of ended, actually, it never really ended. I just kind of faded out from it. I still have definitely some designer stuff or whatnot, because I think it's always going to be a part of me, and it definitely interests me, and it was a big part of my life back then. So I definitely have a small part of me that is interested in stuff like that, but definitely not to the scale where I'm wearing $1,000 shoes every day or stuff like that. But yeah, I was in the business mindset. I was trying to make a buck no matter what for the entirety of my school career, from middle school all the way to graduation. But probably closer towards when I was 15 or 16 years old, and I was drifting away from, no pun intended on the drifting away thing, but I was drifting away from the BMX park and the designer shoes and all that. And I really, really focused everything that I cared about on drifting and motorsports and building and buying and selling cars. I was, like I said, I was into BMX, so the YouTube side of everything, I was really into watching The Come Up and Adam LZ when Adam LZ was still making BMX content. Stevie Churchill and Scotty Kramer, a bunch of really, really cool BMX dudes. But another big step in inspiring me to go into drifting and everything was, I grew up watching Adam LZ make BMX videos and his Stranger edits when he was still writing for Stranger. But Adam LZ eventually turned his BMX channel and BMX company into a drifting channel. He started off with a couple events here and there, and now he's a Formula Drift driver. And I have basically been watching his content ever since he was playing games of bike and stuff like that, all the way to his drifting content. So I peaked my interest peaked basically with Adam LZ, and I mean, I moved along with his whole career. I mean, his first drift car was an S13, and I mean, I was driving the Forza S13 that I was telling you guys about with my buddy Caleb, and there was a couple 240s at the skate park, and everything in my mind was telling me 240s, 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 240s. The Nissan 240SX is the most superior drift car to any chassis, to any. So unfortunately, I became infatuated with 240s, and over the span of my high school career and up until now, I've had half a dozen hatches, an S14, a S13 coupe, and a Silvia imported from Japan. So, I mean, I've always been into S chassis, and that kind of put me into the drift space, and I've drifted a couple of them, built a couple of them, sold a couple of them. Oh, I actually had an S13 convertible too, so I think it's a little bit over half a dozen S13s, and then a couple S14s. But yeah, so once Adam LZ started getting into drifting, I turned to the YouTube drifting space, where I mean everything turned into Tommy F. Yeah and Noriaro, and I mean everyone that was putting out JDM content, I was watching that content daily. As soon as I mean, even when I was in school, I was watching the content in school. Actually, I should probably touch into my high school career and where that all kind of led me as well, because basically everything that I did in high school revolved around motorsports and cars and automobiles in a general sense, because I was in an auto shop program, which Puyallup High School definitely has one of the best auto shop programs in the state of Washington. And I took full advantage of that. Let me think. There was 1, 2, 3, 4. There were 4 2-post lifts, 1 alignment machine, a bunch of welders, a bunch of toolboxes. Actually, this is insane. We all got our own Caldwell toolboxes and tool sets at the beginning of the year, and we got to learn what it was like to be a mechanic and get trained by an ASE certified mechanic. My teacher, Larry Turner. Thank you, Larry Turner, Mr. Turner, for everything that you've done for me over the years. He basically taught me how to turn a wrench, how to jack up a car, how to do an alignment, how to replace exhaust, replace a diff, replace axles, replace brake pads, basically anything. Larry Turner definitely had a major role in developing me as a mechanic and as someone that is interested in motorsports. I think he may have retired last year, or this is his last year. I can't really remember. But thank you, Mr. Turner, if you're watching this. While I was in the auto shop program, I was obviously one of, or the only drift kid. When I bought my first 240 when I was 15. Actually, let's get into that story. We'll get into my very first 240 and how I got into it with, I think, less than $1,000. Actually, definitely less than $1,000. Okay, so let's go back to the very beginning. I sold my BMX bike. I was 15 years old. I knew I needed my very first car, and my parents were helping me get my first car. They said that they would pay for the first car as long as I paid for my insurance and paid for getting my license and all of that jazz. So my parents hooked me up with an 03 Nissan Sentra SER Spec V 6-speed manual. It was tuned. It had an intake. It had a full exhaust. My dad picked it up for a couple grand, I think, and it was definitely a fast car for a first car. Or drift car, or not a drift car, a starter car, like a high school daily driver. And that car was cool, but I always wanted something rear-wheel drive. I wanted a 240. So my parents bought me that, and it sat around for a while before I turned 16 and could actually legally drive it. But while I was 15, I saved up. Actually, I sold my bike. I had $450. Not to my name, but I had $450 worth of spending money that I was going to contribute into buying a drift car and build it up on the side, because I did obviously have the daily driver, the Sentra, that I was going to drive to and from school. So I had some money laying around that I was going to buy a drift car. I was 15 years old and I wanted to drift, and I made it happen. I got on, how did this story start? I got on this car was on Facebook, and let me try to remember. I think it was $750, and no, it was $700, and it was a 1984 Nissan 300ZX. You'll find a very common theme with Nissan. I've had, I think, 30 or 40 Nissans at this point, but I love them. I'll never stay. I can never stay away from them. But it was a 1984 300ZX. It was a turbo model. It had the VG30 DET. It was a pretty stout little car. It had less than 80,000 miles on it, but it was automatic, so you couldn't really drift it. It had an open diff, so you couldn't really drift it, and it weighed 10,000 pounds, so you couldn't really drift it, but it was a cool car. I was 15 years old, and I got there. My dad came with me. Obviously, he gave me a ride to come get it. But he took $450 cash for the car. We met at, I think, Bass Pro Shops, and my dad ended up having to drive the car home. But when we got it home, it had a massive oil leak that was coming from, I think, the turbo seal. Whenever it was running, it would just piss. Oh no, it wasn't the turbo seal. It was the turbo oil feed line. I think it was loose or cracked or something. So any time that you would turn the car on and there was oil feeding to the turbo, it would just piss everywhere. And I spent every free dollar I had on the car, so I didn't really feel like fixing it. And I knew I had a good chassis. I knew I had something that was worth some money, and I got a good deal on it. I mean, it was a less than 80,000 mile turbo 300ZX, and it was in pretty good shape. The paint was faded, and I think the T-tops leaked a little bit, like every 300ZX, but it was definitely a sound little car, and it got up to speed just fine. It just dumped a little bit of oil. It dumped a lot of oil, but I mean, it was $450. I got it for cheap, and I was in it good. So I ended up, I never even turned a wrench on that car. I don't think I ever even jacked it up, but it sat in the front yard for, I think, 2 weeks before I ended up posting it up for sale or for trade, because I knew I was able to make a little bit of money off of it. I had been in the resale space for a couple years now, and I had seen what I needed to know about flipping basically anything. So I posted the car up for $1,500, saying that it needed a turbo replacement or something along the lines, because if you make this problem seem a little bit bigger than it actually is on an ad, and they come and see the car and say, oh, it just needs an oil feed line, oh my god, this is such a good deal, or I mean, something of the sort. Not always does it turn out like that. Sometimes you can advertise whatever it is because there are no problems with the car. Or, I mean, I always try to be as upfront and truthful in my ads as possible, and telling everyone what the cars need. But never mind that. We had the car posted up for, I think, $1,500, and it was running, driving, current tabs, and everything. And I think his name was Hayden, from down in the Oregon area. He hit me up on Facebook, and he had an automatic Nissan, but it was a Nissan 240SX, and everything in me, it didn't matter if it was running, it didn't matter if it was stolen, it didn't matter if it didn't have a motor or tires or suspension underneath it. It was a 240SX, and that was $1,500, and someone wanted to give me it. So I was definitely game for that. So I scrounged up another couple $100, and he was down in Portland, so I think it's about a 3-hour drive south, and I didn't have a truck, I didn't have a trailer. The car, I didn't feel comfortable driving it down or having my dad drive it down, and I didn't know the condition of the 240SX, so I saved up a couple $100 and rented a U-Haul trailer and had my dad load the 300ZX up on the trailer, and we headed down south to see this 240SX. And here, I mean, it was, God, I haven't thought about this in forever, but it was backed in under a guy's carport, and it had a bunch of tarps over it. And he said that it had overheated a couple times. And I mean, I was definitely, I wasn't even listening to the words that were coming out of his mouth when we were standing there, because I was 15 years old and someone wanted to give me their 240SX. So I was standing there looking at it and just in awe of, I mean, it was about to be mine. So I wasn't really listening to what he was saying or all the quirks or whatever. And I never got under the car and I never got acclimated with it. My eyes got as big as the moon when I saw the car, and I knew I had to have it. So as soon as we got there, the guy, I think he just needed something to get to and from work with. So he was happy with the 300ZX and the condition that it was in. And he was pretty mechanically inclined. So I think he was okay with the little bit of an oil leak. He was going to go through and fix that. So we load the 240 up on the trailer, and I'm happy as can be. I mean, I can't even imagine. I can't even describe the feeling of owning your first 240SX. It's crazy because you have no idea the horrors that are ahead of you. So you're still just happy-go-lucky and excited for this future endeavor. Oh my God, we're going to go drifting every weekend. This thing's going to be perfect. And it's going to be nothing like owning a Honda or something that's reliable. Anything that's reliable. So we get this 240SX back home, and it's a single cam, which is the smaller version of the Nissan KA engine that came from 1980, the late 88 for the first models of the S13, all the way up until I think the beginning of 1991, where they switched over to the dual cam, which came with a little bit more torque, a little bit more power from the factory. But this was the lower powered version. It had the single cam KA with an automatic transmission in it. So it wasn't immediately going to be a drift car, because it's almost impossible to drift a automatic low power car, especially with an open diff, especially completely stock, especially when you're 15 years old. So, I mean, we got the car off the trailer and we got it into the second bay of my dad's garage, and I drove it around the block a couple of times, and it was cool. I mean, it did what I never went fast or anything. It was automatic, and I drove it up and down the street. But I was 15 years old and driving my 240SX up and down the street, and it was the coolest thing that I'd ever done. And until eventually we started driving it a little bit further and a little bit harder and a little bit louder, and we would see the temp gauge spike after about 5 minutes of driving. And the thing just smelled and reeked of coolant, and it eventually started smoking white smoke out of the tailpipe, or the exhaust pipe, or the exhaust, or whatever you want to call it. And then obviously the white smoke indicated that the car had a coolant leak somewhere within the head, and coolant was getting into the engine and burning it up and coming out the exhaust. So we knew that there was something wrong. So we ended up doing a crankcase pressure test. No, not a crankcase. Something. We ended up doing some kind of tests, and we found out that the head gasket on that 240 was actually blown. Excuse me, I'll take a sip of water. But yeah, the 240 ended up having a blown head gasket, and I didn't really know what that means. Again, I was 15 years old, and I hadn't even, I don't think, got to the automotive program at PHS yet. So I was still, everything that I had known about 240s and that had claimed to know about 240s or any cars at that moment was basically hearsay. I was pulling shit out of my ass. So I knew that it was a smaller motor. I knew it was a Japanese motor. It wasn't some big honking American V8 that you would have to tear down and throw onto an engine stand and have to completely rebuild. It was a small little Nissan motor. So what's the harm in ripping the head off and throwing a head gasket on there really quick? I mean, you don't even have to pull the motor out. So my dad and I do just that. We, not knowing anything about 240s or not really knowing anything about imports or four cylinders or drift cars or anything like that, we think that we can just rip the head off and replace the head gasket all by ourselves in a day. And we tried that, and it was a shit show, to say the least. Pardon my French. I'm going to cuss once in a while on this podcast. So if you are a child, I'm sorry. Use your earmuffs when I cuss. But yeah, it was basically a shit show. My dad and I tried to replace the head gasket. Oh my God, what a shit show. We ratchet strapped the timing chain to the rafters of the ceiling so we wouldn't have to go through and retime everything again with it was just a shit show. So I don't even want to get into that. So we spent basically more money and time that I was able to afford on this 240, just basically getting it to a point where when I did turn 16, it was able to drive on the street. And all I wanted to do was replace the head gasket really quick and get it to a point where it could drive. The car was basically stock at this point. It just had a blown head gasket. It actually, I have a couple pictures. Actually, I forgot that I can do this. I'll probably throughout this, I've been putting pictures behind my shoulder of the car. So fantastic. What was the first thing that we did? Oh, the 240, before we even did the head gasket, it was only 5 lug converted on the front of the vehicle. If you don't know what that means, the 240SX comes with 4 lug studs to put the wheels on and then throw the lug nuts on to hold the wheels on, obviously. The stock 240SX only comes with 4 lug, but to get a wider range of wheel options or fitment options or just to basically beef up the car, a lot of people will throw a kit to convert the car from 4 lug to a 5 lug to fit obviously more wheels, bigger wheels. But the previous owner had only converted the front of the vehicle to 5 lug, so the first thing I did was went through and replaced the rear hubs as well to make that 5 lug, and then I threw a set of XXRs on it. Not the 527s. The 527s are the multi-spoke ones, but these were just the fat 5s, the 525s. No, that's a tire. Anyways, I threw some XXRs on it, so the 240 was automatic, and it had Tokiko Blue lowering springs on it that I got on OfferUp for $40 back then. So the car was lowered, and it had 5 lug, and it had some XXRs on it. So it wasn't a bad looking car. It was pretty cool. It was white. I ran a police light bar on it for a minute. And I think it said drift. I think I spray painted Drift Patrol or Stance Patrol, something. I spray painted something on the side of it. And eventually the car started overheating. So we went ahead and tried to do the head gasket, but the first time the head gasket was replaced, it failed and started overheating and blowing the white smoke again. I don't think we put RTV or something. I think you're supposed to put a little bit of or some kind of sealant on the corners of the head gasket before you do lay it on the block and put the head on. And we just didn't end up doing that. So the head gasket ended up breaching or blowing again. So I think at this point I was just under $1,000 into this car that I still couldn't drive because the head gasket was blown. So, it was my first 240. I had driven it a couple times, and I learned some things on it, but I knew that it was worth more money, even with a blown head gasket, knowing that it was overheating a little bit. I posted it up for sale for, I think, $2,200. It had a clean title. It had 125,000 miles on it, I think. It was a clean car. I think one of the quarter panels had been bondoed at one point, where the body line is. If you know the 240SX, where there's a body line that follows all the way from the fender all the way back to the rear bumper. I think that was bondoed a little bit, so it was a little wavy, but it was a clean car. I posted it up for sale, and someone ended up trading me while the head gasket was still blown and it was overheating. Someone ended up trading me a Toyota a Lexus GS300. It was a 91, so it was the first body style, the JZS 147 chassis, I believe it's called, with the skinny front headlights instead of the big 4 headlights on the later models. So I got a 2JZ big Lexus with a big motor and 4 doors and rear wheel drive, and it actually had a welded diff and the exhaust cut off of it, and some Megan coilovers on it, I think. So someone offered me this big drift boat, as some people call them, drift boat, because it's just a big ass rear wheel drive car with some power, so you can slide it around a little bit. But all of the GS300s came automatic, so it wasn't exactly a drift car, but it was going to be a fun little rear wheel drive daily driver. I did end up trading the 240SX for the Lexus. So if you remember, I'm still, under $1,000 into this 240 just by trading that 300ZX and throwing some money into some parts and labor on the 240SX, and then trading it for this Lexus GS300. I definitely thought I came out on top on that deal, and eventually the GS300 turned into a drift truck Ranger that was actually kind of a shitbox. It was on its nuts, welded diff. It had it actually had not a hydro. I think just the e-brake extension was ran onto a little rip stick that you could pull and lock up the rear brakes. But it was definitely a cool little Ranger. Okay, so away from that story, that was just kind of the origin story of how I got my first 240SX and taking advantage of basically buying something for a relatively safe price that you're okay losing a little bit of money, or just basically getting what you get from that purchase. So I spent a little bit of money and got that 300ZX, and I traded it for the 240 and traded it for the Lexus, and I got a taste of what it was like to get the things that you wanted without really having to save up money and buy them. So I spent a couple years between probably 2015 and 2017 when I was between a junior and actually probably a sophomore and a senior going to PHS. I spent a lot of time buying drift cars on the internet or trading whatever side, because before I had graduated, I think I had over 6 dozen cars, or maybe 5 dozen. I had well over 50 cars by the time I had graduated. I was buying 240SXs, Toyota Cressidas, Miatas, Honda Accords. I kind of have a soft spot for the 1994 Honda Accord. Actually, you can't see it behind me. It's actually over here. I have a mural with all of the 94 Accords that I've had. I think I've had close to a dozen Accord wagons at this point, but they'll always have a soft spot in my heart. We'll get into Accord wagons a little bit later into, I think, probably a different episode. But I had the 240SX experience, and I didn't spend too much money. I had the Lexus for a while, got into the Drift Ranger. I think the first time I ever actually drifted anything on the streets, I was 16 and I was driving that Ford Ranger because it had the ripstick and the welded diff and it was slammed on the ground. And I live in Washington State, so whenever it was raining out, I would take the Ranger out and do some power slides or some donuts or some 180s on public roads or parking lots or warehouse parking lots or something like that. But I finally got the taste for drifting. The Ranger obviously wasn't the best chassis to continue my build with. I kind of stepped away from anything American. I think I had a Crown Vic and a Mustang, a couple American cars before I got my second 240, which the second 240 I ever got was an 89 Nissan 240SX hatchback, just like the first one I ever got. I think it was a single cam too, so it was an 89 or 90. So eventually when I bought, so we'll go into I'll tell that story from the very beginning. Another 240SX story, so if you guys are bored of the 240 stories, skip to the next 15 minutes, because this one's a little bit longer. I think I ended up selling the Ranger for $2,850. I can't remember. It was less than $3,000 because I had posted up for $3,000, which I knew I was never going to get, but always post high and let them lowball you and meet somewhere in the middle so you can actually get your. Actually, that's going to be my word of advice for today. Post something astronomically higher than you want for it, and just let everyone lowball you and let them meet you in the middle. So by the time that you meet in the middle, you're actually getting the price that you want for the item. Because no matter what you do, someone's going to lowball you, and if there's offers for lower, you can probably haggle with them and bring them to the middle point where they feel comfortable and they feel like they're not getting screwed, and you're at the point where you're actually just getting the full amount of money that you're wanting for your item. This 240SX, this next one, which I eventually turned into my daily driver for a majority of high school, I see it up for sale on OfferUp. It was up for $2,700. It was a black 1989 240SX hatchback. This one was manual. It had a couple modifications. It had some Koenig wheels on it. It was still 4-lug, so it just had some small Koenig wheels. I think it had a short shifter. It had an exhaust. It had, I think it had lowering springs or some cheap coilovers on it or something. But I had some money in my pocket, and it was $2,700. I think I had $2,300 on me. At this point, I'm like 16 years old, and I have my dad drive me out to Kent. At this point, I hadn't even really gotten to the imported side of the JDM car community. I was basically just looking at the USDM side of drifting. And I mean, the car was posted up for $2,700. I had $2,200 at that point, and I saw the car posted. The guy ended up giving me his address, and we pull up and we get there, and it's a right-hand drive importer. It was a warehouse. If you guys if you are familiar with the Pacific Northwest, I show up to Right Hand Drive Specialties, which, depending on how you look at it, is a pretty reputable importer from the Pacific Northwest. I know that they've had a couple stories floating around, and I'm not here to be the judge or jury or executioner on their business. So I've heard a couple things about them. I've heard some bad things about Right Hand Drive Specialties. I've heard some good things and fantastic things and good conversations with the people that actually work at Right Hand Drive Specialties. But we roll up, and I see the 240 sitting there, and it's actually one of the employees that works at Right Hand Drive Specialties cars. It's their personal car that they've been daily driving for a couple of years, but I think they just got accepted for a loan to actually buy a car from Right Hand Drive Specialties. So they were selling their left-hand drive S chassis. Anyways, we get there, and the car is in all right shape. It's straight. It's manual. It has a couple mods on it, but the paint is not the best everywhere. It's got definitely its blemishes from all the way from the front bumper to the rear bumper. But it's a 240, and this one's manual. I'd never had a manual 240 in my entire life, or manual rear wheel drive car at this point. Up until this point, I think this 240 was the first manual besides the Ranger, but I guess that was a truck. So yeah, this is the first manual rear wheel drive car that I had at this point. And I see the car. It's in all right condition. I remember that it was right next to an R32 and a JZX 81. It was the earlier version of the JZX chassis. But I get there, and it's sitting next to a couple right-hand drive legends, and I didn't even know that right-hand drive specialties existed. So I'm at an importer shop buying my first 240, or not my first 240, but my first manual 240, and I'm in heaven again, just pretty much the same way that I was in awe seeing the first automatic one when I went down to Portland to see it. But I was in awe. I saw this thing sitting there, and I think it was mostly bone stock on the inside. It was the earlier version, so it still had the, when you open the door, the seatbelt fucking go. I don't know if you guys have ever seen a 240, but every time you open the driver or passenger door, when you open it, the seatbelt goes from the beginning of the A-pillar and like on a rail. I guess it's a rail. It scoots back and tightens itself against you. And when he opened that door for the first time, I fell in love with it. I mean, just the little things about the S chassis, between the pop-up headlights and the seats and basically everything about a 240 is something that I admire, besides the reliability aspect of it. But we'll get into that a little bit later, even though we've talked about the reliability about the head gaskets on the single cam. So the second one that so we're here at Right Hand Drive Specialties. He opens the door, and he tries to start it, but it clicks. The lights, I remember the lights pop up, but the car just clicks. It doesn't start, doesn't turn over, doesn't make any sounds. So it's obviously just got a dead battery. So the guy pops the hood, and we see that the alternator belt actually wasn't even on the vehicle. It had either snapped or not been replaced or whatever. So I don't even know why he tried to sell the car without an alternator belt, but nonetheless, we get there, he pops the hood, it doesn't start, whatever, and he goes ahead and, I mean, he's trying to get us to come back the next day where he's like, oh man, let me get this thing running for you. Let me get this to a point where you're actually able to drive it home. And the car doesn't start. And I say, I'll tell you what, if you go get a jump pack and you can get this thing to fire over so I can make sure that the motor's good and I make sure that the transmission is good and that the starter's good, basically make sure that it's a good running car and that the only thing it does need is probably a battery or an alternator belt replacement. If you can go jumpstart it, I will give you all the money that I brought with me, which was $2,300. And he was asking $2,700. So, I mean, it wasn't too far off of his original offer. So, he went and got the jump pack and he jump started the car. It started right up. It had a fart can exhaust on it, so it didn't sound the best, but I mean, it was a running and driving manual 240. And again, he wanted to give it to me. So I gave him the $2,200 and they ended up having to deliver the car to my house, which was only like a 15-minute drive from Right Hand Drive Specialties. And they ended up hooking the car up to the Right Hand Drive Specialties support vehicle that they bring all the cars to and from the port with. I think at that time it was a white 06 Silverado 2500 or something with their flat deck trailer. So, I mean, like half an hour later, the guys showed up and backed the 240 into my garage, and that was it. I mean, I owned a 240SX that I only had $2,200 or $2,300 at the time, and I spent every dollar I had getting this 240 that needed money put into it. So I go back to working, get a couple of dollars saved up again, and replace the battery, replace the alternator belt, and this car was in pretty good condition. Like I said, it was banged up a little bit here and there and had some fade in the paint and definitely some blemishes within the plastics on the bumpers and I think the bumpers are actually the only plastic parts on the 240. But yeah, the car was in good condition. I ended up replacing the battery, replacing the alternator, and getting it running and driving and turning it into a cool car. At this point, I'm 16 years old, and I have a daily driver 240SX that's manual. It's black. It's still got the fart can exhaust on it. It's got XXR wheels that this was the black car that I ended up eventually throwing the gold XXR 527s on. You'll probably see the picture behind me. Yeah, so it's on XXRs. I end up getting eBay coilovers for $250 delivered or something, and the car's a good daily driver. I mean, with just the battery replacement and basic maintenance and some wheels and coilovers, and it was a cool car. I didn't really have to do much to it to make it a daily driver. It was basically bone stock under the hood. I don't even think it had a cold air intake on it or anything, but I eventually did put a Corbo bucket seat and a harness bar and some harnesses, and what else did I do? Oh, this was actually the first car I ended up changing the color on. It was a black car that I eventually ended up spraying white. I ended up painting it at my garage, or in my garage at my dad's house. It was not a pretty paint job, but it was an all right paint job from about 2,500 feet away, but it turned out all right. It had stickers and all that. Basically, every 16 or 17-year-old build that has a 240. They put cheap coilovers, cheap wheels, cheap paint, and cheap stickers all over it. Make it look like a cool car. I eventually did start bringing that car into the auto shop and modifying it a little bit more. I swapped out the entire exhaust for, I think, an ISR. No, at this point, it was an ISIS. Back when it was still called ISIS, ISIS. I don't know if I'm going to get demonetized for saying ISIS, but Enjuku's main brand that they manufacture parts for S chassis and R chassis for. I got some of their blast pipes, which is the exhaust that comes out with the two big massive tubes out the back of the car. I replaced the exhaust in auto shop, and I ended up swapping out the differential for a welded diff. In a 2-hour session at Auto Shop, I was able to drop the pumpkin, replace the innards of the welded spider gears. I took the stock gears out and swapped them out so that the stock diff housing had aftermarket welded gears that I put into the pumpkin, and was able to throw it back up into the car and hook it back up and get all the axles and everything tightened in the 2-hour period that I had Auto Shop in, which was pretty impressive. So I definitely took full advantage of the Auto Shop and the automotive program while I was going to school. I definitely used the Auto Shop and the lifts to my full advantage I took it to my full advantage by using the lifts and using the alignment rack and using whatever tools were available to me at school. I was the only one that was buying, flipping, modifying, and trading cars at school and getting graded for it. I ended up actually getting a double varsity letter in the automotive program in high school. So it's hanging up behind me somewhere. I don't know if you can see it, but I got the varsity letter or whatnot from the automotive program, and I eventually became the president of the Viking Motorsports Club. Our mascot was a Viking at PHS, so the Viking Auto Club, and we held a car show for a couple of years at the end of the year, and I became the president, and I was modifying cars during school and after school and using my own workspace and own classroom as kind of a job where I would use these cars that I was buying for cheap and fixing them up and modifying them and giving them alignments or whatever at the shop and posting them up and making some money on them. So I don't know if it's against the rules or whatnot to be working on cars that I owned the cars because I bought, sold, and whatever. I owned them outright, but not all of the cars were legally in my name or whatnot. So I don't know if it's completely legal to be bringing them into school and into the auto shop and modifying them and selling them to other unsuspecting high schoolers. But that's what I did, and that's how I learned how to basically buy, sell, and flip cars for profit. While going to high school, while working at McDonald's, while working at Zoomies, while flipping Bape and Supreme and accessories online and everything like that. But the whole grand scheme of things is I was able to graduate from high school with a 3.0, a pretty solid amount of money, and a relationship that is, stronger than any relationship that I know. Rachel and I have been together, like I said, 6 years now, and she has literally supported me in every endeavor from, all the way back to selling BMX parts and selling cars and selling, selling shoes, selling hypebeast stuff. Rachel has been by my side and supporting of all of that since the very beginning. And now we're at the point where I'm reaching out and trying to do some different things in my life, and she is still here next to me, still here supporting me. Again, thank you, Rachel, for everything that you've done for me. In the upcoming episodes of the podcast, we are definitely going to go into where the automotive space has taken me. I've been to Japan, and I did about a month-long journey in Japan right after graduation where I flew myself and Rachel over to Japan, where I just wanted to live and experience and capture what it was like to live in Japan. And I took a lot of content and pictures and photos before Deals on Wheels even existed. I tried to vlog my experience there, so eventually some of that footage may end up on a vlog or maybe in a podcast towards the end. I wasn't familiar with filming or anything when I did take my trip to Japan, but when we were there, actually, you see the Yashio factory t-shirt and the kendama I showed you earlier, I got that from Japan as well. So we'll go into my trip to Japan and my trips across the country as well that have been inspired by drift cars in the next couple of episodes. The trip to Japan will probably be an entire episode in and of itself. When we were in Japan, it was amazing. I got to see amazing things, meet amazing people. We went to Yashio Factory and I got to spend time with Sam from Samit, the Samit YouTube channel, and he's now drifting with Okachan from Yashio Factory. If you guys are familiar with YouTube, you know who Sam is. He's been on Adam LZ's channel, Tommy FY's channel, Ricer Miata's channel, and obviously Sam has his own Samit YouTube channel, and he's pretty big on TikTok and Instagram as well. But yeah, I just want to thank you all for listening. Excuse my burp there. It's been the first one in the episode, and I've been holding it in for about an hour now. This is definitely a joy to be able to record content that I enjoy talking about and enjoy recording. And it's probably not going to be too boring going through and listening to myself ramble on about cars that, interest myself. And if you don't see all of the pictures of the cars edited in behind me for this episode, I'm sorry. I'm still getting used to editing on the new laptop. This is my first time ever having a MacBook, so the learning curve is a little bit different. Hopefully we still have both camera angles up. I see that this camera is no longer blinking, so at some point during this recording, I'm guessing that died. So hello, camera one. Hopefully this one's still recording. We're just on the hour mark, and this is probably going to be the end of it. I definitely want to get into some more stuff in the next episode. If you are interested in seeing the next episode of Deals on Wheels, the podcast brought to you by Deals on Wheels, definitely make sure that you drop a subscription down below. The big red bar says subscribe. Make sure that you change it to a little white bar that says you are subscribed. So hit that button. Make sure that you hit click all the links down in the description below. There's going to be a link down to DLZONWLZ.com, which is our own web store where we've been selling merchandise and accessories for the last couple months now. And make sure you follow us on all social medias. Like I said at the beginning, at DLZONWLZ on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Pinterest. Everything is all Deals on Wheels. Rachel has definitely been a big help in sourcing all of the usernames and making everything match. Excuse me. So apparently hour is about the distance that I can go before I start losing my mind, yes, but also losing my voice. You can see I'm going a little bit hoarse here. So yeah, that's probably going to do it for this episode. Thank you all for watching. I really appreciate everything that you guys have done for me so far. I enjoy making this content for you. So I'll probably see you in either a vlog that's going up on Tuesday or Wednesday next week, or the next podcast episode that will go up every Friday from here on out. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you in the next one.
I close my eyes and I see dreams of gold.